So I thought we'd start with some review. It is actually really important that we do homework because that's how we implement and walk and love not in words only, but in deeds, or not just in intentions, but in actions. So I thought we had this 3-step waltz, which was our homework. When you ... I feel ... could you please ... And you're asked to give it a go on 3 occasions with 3 different offenses, and ideally not with the same person so they don't feel attacked. and, so just a quick question. I'd be keen to hear some highlights and challenges. I don't want to pretend that this is easy, but it's important we just hear a story or two on something that was helpful, why something was good, did it work differently than usual, or how did it change things, and what was maybe still challenging. So Matt has a mobile mic.
Yes, does that work? That's
It
pretty
does.
loud,
Look
isn't
at
it?
that. That's fine. It's fine. It fits the color of your shirt, which is loud. So it suits. So yeah, who would like to share a highlight or a challenge from just having a go, even if it's you don't have to go into. We're not throwing somebody under the bus like, oh, I had to go talk about this person and about this sin, and that, but just like the gist of, hey, I had a chat and this was helpful or something, or this was challenging, without any details that are going to be inappropriate. So let's start with this side, and then we'll do one from this side, okay? So who's had a chat with anybody, at least having a go? Helen.
It actually came in really helpful when I had to confront my 3 daughters who have a tendency to make our sort of family room quite homey looking, putting it nicely.
Yes, lived in, yes.
And one of the things they tend to do is leave dirty dishes pile up a little bit. So I remembered this, so I was able to use it, you know, when you leave your dishes lying around, I feel, and could you please, you know, make a little bit more effort to clean up. And it definitely came off better. They were less defensive and received it a lot better, I think.
Yep, so you could sense a difference in the reception.
Yes.
Rather than an argument. It was sort of like, oh, all right, you know, yeah.
And it actually helped me not to feel so upset at them or aggravated by it.
Yeah, because at least when you do this, you are already expressing desire, whether it's I feel this way, could you please? I don't want to use the word venting. Venting's not a biblical thing, but you feel heard, and the why, because I'm feeling like this, could you please?
Yeah, I definitely felt heard.
Yeah, great. No, that's good. Thanks. And you know, whether or not change happens, that's up to the other person, right? This is to facilitate and foster peace. Peace is a 2-way thing, as we've talked about, right? Anybody else on this side before we shift over who's at least had a go, maybe? No? Okay. How about this side? Someone from this side. You've been duly warned, or given notice. You've had 5 minutes notice now. So, who'd like to share something? Matt's ready with the mic. No pressure. Even if it's a challenge, even if it actually, oh, I thought it would be easier. Thanks, Pete.
Similar to the furnaces, we use it with our kids. Even before this, when they're being a bit selfish. So like if we're rushing around doing jobs and their natural state is not to do jobs, it's when you leave things out, it actually makes us feel that you are being selfish, or that you don't care about what's happening with this family, and you're putting yourself first, and it puts a big pressure on us. We'd really appreciate if you can participate in this family by helping in these ways. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But it's a really empowering technique that when you're, these actions are, this is what we see with your actions, and this is the impact it's having on us. We'd really appreciate if you could do X, Y, or Z to make this family run a bit smoother.
Thanks, Pete. How many of you gave it a go and it actually backfired and went way worse than you'd hoped? Good. That's good, because it usually it doesn't make things a lot worse, usually, unless there's a whole lot of other stuff brewing underneath, and really this just sparked a much bigger conversation that's not about what you actually said, but everything behind it and under it. That's when things can, then there's a whole lot of other stuff to deal with apart from this thing. But usually going through this step, it's received a bit better, and which is, again, that's what we're trying to foster, peace. So, okay. Now, here we go. Looking ahead, we just looked back a bit on our homework. Looking ahead, I'd like you to think through, so you have the whole hour this morning to think about it. At the end, I'm going to ask, what's an area of conflict you'd like us to consider or focus on next month and talk about? Like maybe something we haven't covered yet, something that needs a deeper dive that maybe we scratched the surface of, something like that. So if you could, because next time will be a lot more tactics, because, so things that you want to discuss would be good, and I'll take little notes, okay? All right, bit of quiz time. We've looked at 3 of the 4 G's so far. I want to do a little quiz, see who can fill in. I know that's very tiny there, so I don't expect you to see that on this dinky screen, but little review of what the G's are, because if we can actually say it, that'll help us be guided by it, if it's just sort of here. So amidst conflict, renewing our minds in the majesty and the purpose of God is what? What's the first G called? Glorify God, or depending on the book by Ken Sande, go higher, right? I can only pick one of the charts. There's different G's, right? So go higher, like, okay, the first thing I need to do is think of God's majesty and purposes in the gospel. Because remember the line, conflict always glorifies someone or something. My question is, will I glorify God through resolving my conflict? Or am I going to glorify me or another idol, right? Okay. Then we recalibrate our own heart in the mirror of honesty. What is that G called? Yeah, get the log out of your own eye, or in this version, it's get real, but it's, yes, get the log out of your own eye. Well done. Then now we really need to consider our approach. So before I go, I need to think of my approach. What's that G? That was last month. It is. It's get ready, but with an emphasis, gently engage. So really, I think get ready gently would probably be a good summary. Yep. And then today now we look at the 4th G, which is getting together. Resolving conflict through reasonable solutions, which actually factors in a lot of things, as we're going to see. And I've got to tell you, what happens to me every time I prep for this month and this teaching time, every time I start thinking, okay, tactics are great, skills are great. If we are not motivated to want to implement these skills, well, then it just won't make any difference. And so I surprised even myself with wanting to stir our soul and motivation, spending more time than I planned on sort of the prep side, which is still practical, but it's before we're going to end with a technique, can be a flow, a biblical process would probably be a better word, steps, biblical process of steps. Pride is the biggest thing in the way of our resolving conflict. It always has been, and it always will be. So I thought, okay, let's start with some stirring of the soul, rekindling our desire to love and forgive. And so I've got some quotes up to help. Christians are the most forgiven people in the world, so we must be the most forgiving people in the world. That's a summary of Matthew 18. Read it. It's a good chapter, okay? This is from Ken Sande, and I quite like this. Unforgiveness is the poison we drink, hoping that others will die. That is a profound picture. When we harbor resentment and spite and we let it fester, we're drinking a poison of unforgiveness, hoping that the other person will suffer. And that's not the right approach. That is such a great picture of what we ought not to want. Unforgiveness is a poison I drink, hoping that they will die. So remember that. It'll be in the notes. Because I think what I'm reminded is forgiveness is neither a feeling, nor is it just forgetting, passive. Forgiveness is a radical decision to remember no more. So it's a decision not to hold an offense. So it's active. So again, don't play the "My Situation is Unique" card. Don't sing the "You Wouldn't Understand" song. Jesus understands. And he has the nail-scarred hands and a thorn-pierced brow to prove it. Okay? Jesus understands, and he showed us the way. Okay? Therefore, we're going to have two sections today. We must pray and then pause. And that pause is a biblical process, but even the praying is. So the first bit's going to be a bit more sermonic than I expected. Are there people you've forgiven? Like you have, but then you see them again, or even their name gets mentioned, and all of a sudden, it's like a trigger. And that trigger brings back memories of an offense or hurt against you. So it sparks like a reliving of that offense. And even with emotions that might accompany that, stress or rage or panic. Forgiveness we do, but then we often have to re-forgive when the memory of the offense happens again, is triggered again. We need to ask God to change our heart, and we need to ask God to help us dwell on the right thing. And those often go hand in glove. In fact, it's very hard to separate a request for God to change our heart towards this person if we're not also asking God to help us dwell on the right things. And there's actually a passage that shows us this. We often don't make a connection. That's why we like to teach the Bible in context. There's a very well-known, it's a less-known conflict, but there's a conflict that turns to prayer in the Bible. And it's in Philippians 4, and it starts, I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Two women in the church in Philippi are not at peace. They're at loggerheads. There's conflict. Okay? Yeah. Maybe you're familiar with that verse. I think what we forget, though, is from this is the start of chapter 4. From this then flows a very famous passage that most of us know, be anxious for nothing. Okay? Or as the CSB translated, don't worry about anything, but in everything through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, if there's any moral excellence, anything praiseworthy, dwell on these things. Do what you've learned, receive it and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Now, what I want us to see is the chapter, there's a couple verses between those. I should have a ... after agree in the Lord. But what starts the chapter is conflict. And then, with conflict comes anxiety often and stress. So what I want us to see is the emphasis is on the peace of God and the God of peace. That's what's sort of bookending this discussion. And so it's the peace of God amidst conflict and trials, okay? Now, God's peace is a prized goal. That's what he wants for us as individuals, but he doesn't just want inner peace. He wants familial peace. He wants Euodia and Syntyche to get along and work together for the gospel, okay? Now, what I want us to note is two things. So, and that famous verse is couched in this context about being anxious for nothing. Now, I want to highlight two things. The first one is this crucial phrase. I've highlighted this in the past with thanksgiving, but I want to talk about why it's crucial. You see, last week in Ephesians 5, one of the three evidences of being filled with God's Spirit is indeed giving thanks in Christ. Okay, that's one of the three evidences. Here's what I didn't have time to mention in last week's long sermon. Even the passages that are a negative example of what not to do, and what I mean by that is the exact opposite of being filled with the Spirit, which is grieving the Spirit and quenching the Spirit. They too have thanksgiving as a contrast. So you see, filling with the Spirit is, well, there is thanksgiving. If you're grieving the Spirit or quenching the Spirit, you need to stop and give thanks. In fact, thanksgiving is part of the antidote to stop quenching and grieving the Spirit. So what I want us to see is that thanksgiving is actually crucial to walking in the Spirit, okay? Now, it's not rocket science to realize you will not be an effective agent of peacemaking if you're grieving and quenching God's Spirit, okay? By lacking thanksgiving. And it's not rocket science to realize you will not be an effective agent of peacemaking if you are not regularly giving thanks. See, if we're dwelling on the wrong things rather than the right things, we're not going to be an effective peacemaker. So, right dwelling or righteous dwelling leads to thanksgiving, which leads us to praying rightly, which brings peace. And I want you to sort of see that the experiential outcome of the peace of God is linked. Look, it's linked with thanksgiving. Present your requests, and the peace of God will be made. And dwell on these things, and now walk in it, and the God of peace will be with you. So I just want us to see and get specific. Supernaturally, spiritually, Spirit-filled specific. Now, as we think, how can I be motivated to do what Jesus commands? Love your enemies. Three ways we see this love. Do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. How much more then, if we do that for enemies, should we do this for people in the family of God, for Christians who are also saved? Even if those Christians have offended you, they're in the family, okay? So this verse is basically saying there's the Philippians, where there's gospel renewal by thanksgiving in thought, word, and deed. So I want to start with thanksgiving in thought, which is going to be praying. Back to the person whose name triggered a new panic attack, anger, an offense came up. When that trigger happens, we should pray for them. And I mean pray for them, not against them. Oh, the pastor said pray. I'm going to pray an imprecatory prayer. No, that's pray for them, not against them. See, to mentally rehearse a past offense. Oh, that person, I heard that name. Oh, right? And what we're doing is it's like we're relaying pavers back to the hurt and walking that journey back to what we have chosen to forgive and actively decided to remember no more. we're actually walking back to that and refreshing and renewing our mind in that offense. So we don't want to do that. So instead, commit to short-circuiting that relaying of pavers and journeying back to that offense. So you hear their name or you see them, pray and give thanks. Ask God to bless them, because they're not even enemies. They're in the family of Christ. I'm speaking about church people here primarily, but this verse applies to everybody. But pray that God would bless them. Do what Jesus said. Next time their name comes up or you get triggers, this is a thing we've got a deep hurt. There's a lot of repeat forgiving, right? I remember again, now I need to choose to forget again. Next time, thank God for a sign of grace in that person's life. Something that actually is God is at work, and I'm going to thank him for that. And this is what's going to happen if you make that a pattern. Dwelling on what's praiseworthy, replacing critical pavers back to the offense with praiseworthy things. As you do that, praying for God to bless them and even grow them, what you will find is that's a pattern in your life. God will be growing you, and he'll be blessing you by freeing you from once consuming re-triggers of an offense to not have that same pain and hurt. So you're asking God to help them, and you will be helped and blessed and freed in the process. Okay, that's thanksgiving in thought. Thanksgiving in word. Well, when you talk to others about that person who offended you in the past, speak well of said person, said offender. Express appreciation for what they have done well by God's grace. Draw attention to their fruitful qualities. Do the same if you converse with the offender. It is in the past. You've chosen to forgive and remember no more. The tongue, Proverbs 15 says, the tongue that heals is a tree of life, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. Okay? So don't just ask God to bless them, give them a blessing. It's counterintuitive. This is supernatural. It's not natural. This is what Paul says. Now, this is a category of somebody who has expressed repentance, okay? Paul writes to the Corinthians, because he talked about this person in 1 Corinthians, now 2 Corinthians. Forgive and comfort him, otherwise he may be overwhelmed by excessive grief. Grief not befitting someone who has been forgiven and who has expressed repentance. So bless them in word or talk about them positively with others. Thanksgiving in deed, finally, then we'll get to the pause bit, moving from prayer, but thanksgiving in deed. John writes, little children, let us not love in words alone, but in action and in truth. And I will say, oftentimes, if you act in love, feelings can catch up, okay? Love is primarily a commitment. Love comes with a feeling, but that's inherent in love is a commitment for the other person's well-being, okay? Now, Ken Sande tells the story of it's the aftermath of an argument he had with his wife, and he ended up being in a grocery store doing her to-do list, so he was a bit even miffed at that because he was hurt by her, then he was shopping for her. And he writes, I noticed a special coffee, a very particular coffee she liked on the shelf of this store. And he writes, if she hadn't been so unkind to me today, I would have surprised her with that. Right? So then he reassures the readers, just to check the price, he picked up the coffee to look at the price, and he said, as he picked it up and just contemplated potentially getting it for her, is my resentment melted and I was overwhelmed with love for my wife, and I desired to see her face light up with this gift. And he brought it home, and it was a breaking of the ice to bridge and talk about reconciliation. And we don't always feel like doing something that's loving, but whether it's taking a splinter out of a fingernail of your child or yourself, that doesn't feel great, but it's a loving thing to do. Take a step and pray that God would bring feelings that catch up with the commitment of love. And I want to actually, before we shift to pause, I want you to be motivated with the gospel and the difference the gospel can and should make for us as peacemakers. And I want to put a very real and raw life contrast before you about what we choose to dwell on and when we pray, what God can do. There's a negative and a positive example. I want you to see the difference the gospel makes, because one's not a Christian and one is. I had no idea those 8 words, men to the left, women to the right, would mark the last moment I would ever see my mother. These are words from Elie Wiesel, a Jewish Holocaust survivor, 60 years after the Holocaust. He's recounting this. And his thoughts and experiences at Auschwitz, the largest Nazi extermination camp. Just at that one camp, over 1 million Jews were murdered. Those who didn't die in the gas chambers, by the way, you know what the average lifespan was if you weren't executed? 4 months was the average lifespan because of exposure, malnutrition, disease. Wiesel was 15, so he's young and strong, and he defied the odds and survived. In his book titled Night, this is what he writes. And I want you to hear the dwelling, okay? Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp, which turned my life into one long night. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the faces of the children whose bodies I saw turn into wreaths of smoke beneath a silent blue sky. Never shall I forget the flames which consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to dust. Never shall I forget these things. Never. Now, he's a Jew, he's not a Christian. Understandably, after great loss and suffering, he's jaded. Okay, obviously, that's a given. But because he will never stop dwelling on these atrocities, 60 years later, he is still haunted, having no answers, no solution. After Auschwitz, many people asked, how can anyone believe in God? And I think the proper question is, how can anyone believe in man? Because it is we who defied God and did what we did at Auschwitz. So that's case one of a non-Christian who doesn't have hope and forgiveness in Christ. I want us to have a gospel contrast, which is Corrie ten Boom's a Christian. Now, her entire family was arrested, put into a concentration camp, not because they were Jewish, but because they hid Jews in their home in Holland in World War II. And she writes this. I was sharing my testimony in a church in Munich, Germany, in 1947 when I saw him, the Secret Service man who stood guard at the shower door at the Ravensbrück concentration camp. He was the first of our actual jailers I had ever seen since the war. This is 2 years after the war. Memories came back with a rush. It's understandable. The huge room with its harsh lights, the pathetic pile of dresses in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath her skin. See, what's happening is this pathway back, right? It's natural. We've just got to fight it. Now, back to quoting. Now, he was in front of me, hand thrust out. How grateful I am for your message, Fraulein, to know that in Jesus, all our sins are washed away. Corey comments, my blood seemed to freeze as vengeful thoughts boiled through me. Back to the man. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your testimony. I was a guard there, as you probably know. Since then, I've become a Christian. God has forgiven me the cruel things I did. But I would cherish hearing it from your lips as well, Fraulein. Will you forgive me? Again, the hand came out. It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I had ever had to do. With coldness clutching my heart, unable to raise my hand, I prayed. I prayed silently, Jesus, help me. I, and she means in her own strength, cannot forgive him. Give me your forgiveness. I will lift my hand, you supply the rest. So I place my hand into the one stretched out in front of me, and as I did, an incredible thing took place. From my shoulder racing down my arm into our joined hands, and then into my heart sprang a healing warmth of love for this man, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands. And I discovered this. When God tells us to love our enemies, he gives, along with the command, the love itself. Now that's a pretty hard scenario. Most of our things would be sort of like, yeah, okay, yeah, but because God had loved and forgiven her, and she prayed and begged God to renew her mind in God's forgiveness to her, once an enemy of God, once in her heart a murderer, then we can forgive and love as God has called us to. And I want to put the graphic contrast between 60 years later, Wiesel is still haunted because he is without Christ. 2 years later, with Christ, Ten Boom from the heart is forgiving her former enemy and captor because of what Christ did 2,000 years ago. Christ is her hope and her answer for love and forgiveness. And this is the motivation we need to be reminded of, and the encouragement that God will supply what we need to fulfill his good commands. And we need faith to do that, faith to pray, faith to ask, faith to renew gospel thanksgiving in word and in thought and in word and in deed. And close off this section with a great quote from a great book called Living the Cross-Centered Life, where the author says, nothing in all creation is more steeped in the miraculous than the fact of your forgiveness and mine. And so as I thought, and I didn't expect to do a little sermonette on this, but I just thought, before we get to tactics, we need to remember what motivates us, and that is Christ and his love. And it's great to hear people walk by faith and see the difference that the gospel makes. And I hope you can be encouraged and motivated to trust God and to pray, to give thanks and stop that pathway and bless and not curse. Any questions on that bit? Yeah. Okay. Pray, 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 and then pause. Okay. Ken Sande, this is from the book Peacemaker. Ken Sande calls this, it's a win-win with interest-based negotiations. Now, he's not talking about banking. I'll explain what he means by interest in a bit. But Jesus sums it up pretty well. Put Jesus' summary up. Whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. This is the law and the prophets. Okay? This is interest-based Loving, living, negotiating. So he's come up with a PAWS, which is an acronym, and it's simple: prepare, affirm relationships, understand interests, and I'll explain what he means, search for creative solutions, and then evaluate options, okay? And what I want to do is unpack a scenario that he has in his book and sprinkle in a few real life things as well. And then we'll get to this, because this is going to be our homework for this month, which is to attempt a pause kind of peace seeking. So here's the background. Christian couple Jim and Julie live on the edge of town in a suburb with every house has 2-acre blocks of land. The houses of both Jim and Julie, the Christian couple, and Steve and Sally next door are very close to the fence because the open acreage is on the opposite sides of that fence. Steve and Sally, the non-Christian neighbors, started recently raising border collies as a hobby and a small business. The dogs have been robbing the family of sleep with very early morning dog training and exercise, additionally waking up the kids during nap time as the singular tree giving shade to the dogs is right between the houses. Okay, close houses, fence line, tree, shade, lots of acreage the other sides. So, prepare. What do you think, as we open this up, how could Jim and Julie prepare to have a helpful discussion about lack of sleep, kids woken up from the naps early morning? Like, how could they prep, do you think? So they've prayed, okay? So we've done the pray. That's part of prepping. But now they're doing the nitty-gritty of prepping. What do you think? Matt's got a mic. What could be done in a situation? I mean, think of anything. It's okay. Could be legal stuff, town council stuff, biblical stuff. Just, think. What would you do? What would you check into or prep? Okay, and then Lynn's after Jen.
I've got a cheeky answer. Give them some plants to grow on the other side.
Okay, yeah. Well, you're going right to this, like, the solution, which is great. Like, if all people thought like that, well, hallelujah, Jen. Most people actually get argy-bargy and don't prep, and then they make things worse, right? Like, let's be honest. We probably have failed to prep, and our failure to prep has prepared us to fail and escalate, right? Lynn, so thank you for that. Lynn.
Well, I think you have to build some sort of relationship first.
Yep.
Coffee, tea, barbecue.
Yep.
Something like that.
Yeah. See, now you're hitting home, sister.
As long as it's not poisoned.
Yeah. See, I actually thought Jen was going to say stuff some sleeping pills in a sausage and throw them over, but she had a much better long-term solution. The reason I say that she's hitting home is this is in his book, and his book's 20 years old, whatever. While we were in the States, we got brand new neighbors. And I'm reading this chapter again to prep, and this is unreal. Like, the relevance of this is unreal because they have 2 dogs. They bark at anything and everything all the time, but we don't know our neighbors. We barely know them. And they've bitten all the people in the home, and we're trying to think, what do we do? So, like, my homework for this month is going to be prepping. Like, trying to live out this in some way, shape, or form. So, because it's ridiculously relevant. One last input on how we might be able to prepare. It keeps spinning, hey? Yeah. Sorry, brother. You can talk, though, while he's primping me.
I just want to give you an example of a barking dog story where I wasted a whole year of putting up with barking dogs.
Okay.
So I lived with my parents, and the bedroom that I was in was 2 metres from the property where the dogs were.
Yeah.
And they barked non-stop all night, right? So I just put up with it and prayed about it. And then I bought one of those dog barking things, like a remote control, and I'd press it. And it was supposed to work, and I think it might have occasionally. And one day I thought, why don't I just go and talk to them? I said, just don't talk to these neighbours. So I said, Mum, can you come with me? I'm really scared. And they were just so lovely. I just said, look, I'm really sorry. I know we haven't met, but your dogs have just kept me awake for about a year, and I'm really just.
Nice to meet you, but could you?
Do you know what they said? They said, "Oh, we're so sorry. We'll bring them in at night," and that was the solution.
Wow, it was just.
So I wasted all that time.
Yes, yeah.
Stressing.
Yep.
And
yeah.
now I have insomnia. Anyway.
Sorry, I'm going to turn you down.
Yeah, we might, because you've tidied this up, Matt. I'll list just a few things, because we'll press on for time. Those were all really helpful. First, Jim and Julie, in their preparation, they got the facts. They journaled the time and frequency the dogs would bark, so that there was something to actually like, wow, we've thought about this, and it happens, because Steve and Sally might not be home all the time when the dogs are barking, right, if they're off at work, and so they just don't know. They checked the laws to see what noise, pollution, all those things. They anticipated reactions maybe, so they planned for desired outcomes, but also an alternative agreement, because they need to look, okay, we've got to overlook minor things. We might not get everything we want, so let's come up with a couple options. And then they selected an appropriate time and place to chat, wisely thinking of their neighbors' schedules, not interrupting dinner. Oh, they just had a fight. Let's go over now and chat, right? Preparations revealed other neighbors were further away, not affected by the barking. The local magistrate therefore did not see this as a misdemeanor, meaning the authorities were not an option. This had to be handled personally, relationally, okay? So that they've done their prep, right? Affirmation. We tend to skip this step. How could Jim and Julie, now they've been, for context, they've been neighbors for quite a few years, okay? And they started the dog thing recently. So what could Jim and Julie say in the process, like Lynn, getting this thing going with affirming relationship? What could they, what are some sample ways? What could they do or say, or affirm? A quiet mob tonight. Yep. Here we go.
Did it working? Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe they could show some interest in the dogs, because they might not hate the dogs. They might think
Yeah.
they're cute dogs. Say,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
just really think you've got lovely dogs, and was
Yeah.
wondering, do you want to have a cup
Yeah.
of tea sometime, or can we
Yeah.
walk your dogs? Or I don't know.
Your dogs
Just
are
something about the
beautiful.
dogs.
Yeah, maybe just the dogs knowing them better might
Might just-
calm. Yeah. So you could affirm, lovely boy, you do a good job. You know, like your dogs get, you know, they're beautiful, and you know, yeah. So they can assume the best of them, that they're not being malicious. They can speak courteously. They can ask for a meetup time, not demand it. Declare their relationship is important. And it is. They're next door neighbors. And that's why we've got to think through with our new neighbors, which are not the kind of neighbors like on your ideal reality show of what you'd want. They moved away. Now it's been swapped. So starting a conversation with words such as this. These are two examples, two different scenarios, okay? So one is Jim and Julie. We've enjoyed your friendship over the years and really appreciate you as neighbors. And we also are thankful you're willing to chat with us. And it's because we value our friendship and the neighbors you've been that we want to find a solution to something, right? So you're just starting affirming friendship, which is important. If it's at work, you know, or let's say somebody owes you something, this is a financial scenario. I admire how hard you've worked to start paying off this debt, and you've kept me informed of your financial situation. Since you've treated me with respect, I'd like to do everything I can to find a workable payment plan, right? So you're like, I want to work with you. We're on the same team. We're either friends or colleagues, or you owe me something. So that's what affirming relationship does. It helps to, okay, we're not opponents. Now we can be shoulder to shoulder trying to pursue a similar goal, which leads us to understanding interests. And this is what I need to define what Sandy means by interest. And it's the difference between a position and an interest. Okay? A position is a definable perspective or an outcome. You have a position on something, right? If that dog keeps barking, you need to get rid of her. That's my position. I've just laid down my formal position on the matter, right? Or she's my dog and you have no right to tell me what to do with her. That's my position, right? A definable perspective and outcome. An interest is what motivates people. And when you get to the motivation level, you can work together in collaboration, hopefully, if there's a way. So here's an interest. I enjoy breeding and training dogs, and I need extra income. Okay, so this is the motivation. They love dogs, they love training them, and they're short on money. My kids get really unreasonable when they lack sufficient sleep. That's a motivation, right? It's not an ultimatum, it's a motivation. Some interests can be deep and hidden. They're not really surface level. So this might be a reality that isn't spoken, but you can think about and try to draw out what interests them. So with Sam, the non-Christian neighbor, this is the only thing I've ever done that makes me feel successful, is breeding, raising, and training dogs to do tricks. Those you have to have relationship to get to know what's motivating. And by the way, if you want a biblical passage about that looks into a great example of this, read 1 Samuel 25, which is Abigail mopping up the mess of Nabal, her husband, when he insults David. And she actually goes and says, you know, I'm so thankful that you haven't wanted to shed unnecessary blood, that you care about your dynasty and your family name. And so, so she's getting into what's motivating David, which is really good. So by Jim and Julie, here was what they did to gain understanding. It's they asked questions about what got Steve and Sally started into dog training. They learned of Sally's deep affection for dogs, Jim's dissatisfaction of his success at work, in the office, but his joy in succeeding at dog training, and then the couple's need for extra income so they don't have enough money to use a kennel or another place to train. So that all informs and think, okay, well they love dogs, they need income, like whatever. We've got to understand what's driving them, not kill it, because none of those are bad motivations. Those aren't sinful motivations necessarily. So you shouldn't want to pour water on it and dismiss that. How can you work with that? Okay. By the way, I want to give you the example of I've given some examples of things I've done terribly and bad examples. This is something our neighbor at our previous house did terribly. These first three, like prep, affirm relationship, understand interests. We had a brand new neighbor after like 10, 15 years at our old house, and he's just started putting up quite a sloping property we lived on, and he put a big brick wall, a Besser brick wall, high up the way that water flowed. And it was just about to divert all this water into a sloping part of our property that would flood my office, which I know because it flooded in the past, and I mitigated it. Now that thing he put up, which completely changed the direction of water, the natural water flow, unmitigated my flood aversion plan. So I went over, I said hello, and he dismissed me. I just said, oh, hey, the drainage of this, oh no, it's going to be fine. There's some little thing down at the bottom, it'll all seep. And I'm like, oh, I've lived here 15 years. Like I've seen palm fronds go like a river on my lawn, like sailing like a boat. So much water comes down this hill. Like I've seen it repeatedly. Like it won't be sufficient. Like the water will get trapped and flow. And so like, could you do something to like put in because it was just had to go down through the ground. He didn't even have like one of those U-channel things to catch it and take it. So, no, he's like, no, this is fine. This is what code requires. And I said, oh, it might be what code requires on any property, but it will divert. So I'm probably then going to have to raise my wall just a bit higher so it actually goes over the wall and keeps going down the hill the way it naturally goes. And the first thing he said immediately and rudely was, that's illegal, you'd better not do that. And so like I was right away, I was at war with a neighbor because he thought he knew better than I did at a property I've lived 15 years at. He doesn't know the law. And so he didn't try to understand me. He didn't try to affirm any relationship, and he just threatened me, right? That's not going to work. Like that never works, right? So when you experience, I'm sharing an experience of the opposite side of what not to do. And it's easy when you experience it. So, okay, now how do I want to not be that guy, that person to other people, and just throw up barriers and basically make peace way, way harder to accomplish. So, given that they now understand the motivations of the neighbors, they actually searched for creative solutions to try to reduce the barking. The times of the day, that kind of a thing. And some of the initial suggestions that they had prepared weren't workable for various reasons. They discovered in conversation. But they tried, they searched for solutions. And then they had to evaluate the different options. And it wasn't a really, really simple option because like planting on the other side would be good, but it would take a couple of years, right? And the kids napping, probably would be past napping by the time there were trees, right? So the solution they actually came up with, which led to peace and harmony, Jim and what's her name, Jenny, Jill, I don't know, whatever. Julie, thanks. Yeah. They said, you know what, our uncle has an orchard. What about we will pay to bring a fully grown tree, have it, cut the soil, put it on the other side, a big tree on the other side of your acreage, and you train the dogs on the other side. And it can find shade over there. And then they're going to be hundreds of meters away instead of 5 meters away. And it worked. So like your initial, you went right to this solution, but it was a long term, and it actually, because their neighbors were financially pressured, it cost them, but they gained. They gained relational harmony, they gained sleep, and to them it was way worth it, right? So this is an example like he gives of not a really simple, easy kind of a thing, but it was a process where they tried really hard checking code, checking with neighbors in a non-slandery kind of way. And I've just distilled, he goes through pages of what this whole thing looked like. And their older daughter offered to, feed when certain times when they were gone. So then they were trapped. They weren't getting cage crazy and barking, which was the nap time bark because they're at work. And so like they did what they did, and it was a beautiful outcome because they probably strengthened their relationship as neighbors, which was getting edgy because of the lack of sleep. And they had a long-term outcome that was a win-win because they didn't just go in, you know what? Your dog is, they could have gone in threatening, like, I think this violates code. I have code 96208, and you're training your dogs at 5 a.m., and stop it, or I'm going to bring the full weight of the law on you, right? Oh, I appreciate the love, neighbor, right? That's not what love the neighbor, I mean, that's a last case resort if nothing else works after many options. But we can do that. Like your scenario is great. Like it was an easy win, going straight to, hey, it's nice to meet you. Could you do something with your dogs? I've lost a lot of sleep. Like, yeah, that's right. And to prevent or to dial down the risk of that backfiring because you didn't really know them and invest in them, it is really wise to affirm relationship and understand their interests. Get to know them, build a bit of relationship, get them to open up, and then talk about this in a helpful way that is going to not be dismissive of their motivations and desires. Okay? So, questions on that? Because then we're going to pause for a bit. But yeah, questions about this process, this scenario. No, okay. You guys are quiet. That's okay. So here's the pause. We're going to take 5 minutes now because I figure if you don't do this now, well, you might not do it. So I'd like you to take 5 minutes, think of just one conflict scenario in your life. It could be work, it could be with somebody in the church, it could be with me in light of this class. It could be your home, right? Get started just with, like, you can use your phone, take note, write paper, whatever works for you. Just think, I've got a scenario. I'll put the pause back up there with what they are. And just think through really, really basic, how can I prepare? Okay, I can do this, I can do this. How can I affirm them? Think of something you can say. And just get going, not in a way that's comprehensive, like a big paragraph of, I'm going to say this. I've sinned against you, and heaven make me as one of your servant, like a prodigal son. Just a bullet point thing. So then you can actually, because your homework for the month is going to be pray, 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 like Corey, and think of the gospel and be thankful, and then pause, and then get together with person or persons pursuing peace. So all we can do is pursue it. It's up to God to bear the fruit, okay? But so that's the home. So going back to the pause principle, I'll just put it up. And so just take 5 minutes now, just chicken scratch bullet points of something so that this month you can say, well, now I'm thinking, I've thought about some conflict, and I've thought about a couple of steps. Now I'm going to flesh it out and pray, flesh it out more, pray more, and then prepare, affirm, understand interest, not position. And okay, so take 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. Does anybody need another minute, or are you prepped a bit? Okay. How about I'll start and just share with you what I'm going to have to do. Okay, this is broad brushstrokes, and then somebody might want to give us such as in your scenario. Because I'm the teacher and I'm using examples for everybody to hear and learn, not everybody has to share the detail that I do about our scenario, but our new neighbors are very, very live out loud, like loud neighbors. And I don't mean just their dogs. A profuse and loud use of the F-bomb dropping is frequent. And right now the windows are closed, and it's winter. As spring is coming. And so, okay, what do I need to do? I haven't thought a ton of prepare beyond this. We have no relationship. So like, yeah, we've said, yes, we've said hello.
Before we've heard all the screaming.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. When I say no, very little. Walked over, knocked on the door, introduced ourselves, had a 15-minute chat about a dog. One dog particularly, it's all bark, no bite. Oh, except for the time it locked on the neck of the other dog in the dog park, because they shouldn't have taken their lead off the dog. You don't do that in a dog park. So all bark and some bite, and it's now pretty much every family member. We learned, we said hello, and that's it. That's all we've done. They don't know I'm a pastor. They don't know what I do. So I'm hoping, even inevitably it'll come, what do you do? Oh, I'm a pastor. Maybe, I'm hoping they have some semblance of understanding interest. And maybe, F-bomb dropping loud and frequently, gee, man, they might not appreciate that. Maybe we should dial that down, whatever. Who knows? But we could just go to legal code, probably. So he actually said that, because he showed us his bit arm, this is the master of the house. The dog bit him, the dog's bit the youngest, so, if it bites both ends of the family, it's going to bite anybody, and it ran out once. he had a giant gap. He said the dog's either going to have to be put down or rehabilitated, and like of people who do it. That was 2 weeks ago, and it's still there, and they're barking and fighting and screaming, so things are still happening. So we really don't have relational collateral at all. So really, I know having a cuppa and just trying to be neighborly is got to be a next step. Otherwise, it would possibly breed a long-standing war, which we're going to be singing at Grace Group, and they're going to hear our songs on a Wednesday night. So is there going to be, you don't want, and they'll hear the J-bomb, right? So you don't want to, we don't want to ratchet up. We want to dial down. Okay. So anyway, so that's I've got to prepare, and preparing is the first step. Just gonna have a cuppa, have a meal, something like that. Okay. Any you were gonna share, or somebody was gonna share a.
I was about to say what you said though. Once they find it Christians, hopefully they might respect that.
Hopefully.
They might not swear.
Yeah. Or less loudly. Like, I don't expect them to get converted like that. Oh, you're a pastor. Whooing, we're saved. And we're completely transformed in a chat. But just that they be mindful, hopefully. Yeah. Lynn.
I just think
Here comes microphone, Matt.
just because people swear and carry on like that doesn't mean that they're not nice people.
Yes.
We've had neighbours like that. The F word was like every second word. Sometimes it was every word. at the kids, and the kids used to do the same. But they were lovely. They were sweet. They were really nice people. So I think you've got to be careful that you don't build resentment and have a resentful thought against these people. Oh, those sort of.
Yep, that's right.
Just they're lovely people. They don't know any different.
Yes, absolutely.
And
yeah.
they don't even realise that everybody else doesn't talk like that.
Yes, that's right. We expect pagans to be and live and value what pagans value and speak like them.
So it's
Yeah.
you've got to get this in your head
Yes.
before you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before our cuppa. Yeah, because we don't want to be judgy. We want to know them and be neighborly, right? Yeah.
Don't you live next to the Whitakers?
Just for the video, thank you, Matt, just to get that
I've
on there.
had lots and lots and lots and lots of practice.
Classic. Okay, so anybody want to, this is good, anybody want to not talk about our scenario, but maybe something you've decided to do or take a step in the pause principle, without, detail and slander and throwing people under the bus, but yeah. Oh, here comes, I'm trying to think of a majestically mobile Matt microphone. Yeah.
My scenario is a work scenario, and one thing in terms of the pause principle that I have found really helpful recently is really that affirming relationship, because I found that having some of those really hard conversations has been so much easier when the person has really understood that actually I really want the best for you. This situation is really tricky, and perhaps what I'm telling you is not what you want to hear, but actually how can we make this really work for you?
Yeah.
And your best is what I want.
Yeah.
And so, the affirming relationship and understanding interests, that really stood out to me.
Great.
And it really made me think of how better I can do that, in a work context.
That's great. Super important, because it's look, we're sinners, right? Who wants to hear a hard word about anything? Underperforming, or you're not the most pleasant team member, or none of us like being criticized. It's not a super joyful thing. But when we're reminded we're on the same team with a mutual goal and we feel that, well, then a coach can lay strips into an athlete. If you're united and you're pressing on, well, I know the coach, I want what the coach wants, and I want to, you know, so it's okay if he's going to sub me out or say, you got to work on your dribbling or whatever, because that goal's been reaffirmed and we have a bond. But without that, it's a constant reaffirmation and
Yes.
re-understanding
Yeah.
and reaffirming. And then those hard words become like faithful to the wounds of a friend rather than, you know, just, oh, she's so negative and critical all the time.
Yeah. And I found even people have been more accepting of me just speaking biblical truth, like even saying, you know, about heard this at church and it seemed relevant, or, you know, the
Yeah.
Bible said, like, you know, and because they know that actually I just want their best,
Yeah.
they've been much like accepting. And I haven't always been in that situation at work. So yeah, it's been interesting.
It's good that you see the difference
Yeah.
when the fruit. That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think maybe we have time for one more, because then we're at time. So we want to keep to our 12:30 commitment. Okay.
This is going back many, many years. When Pierce and I were engaged, I worked as a secretary in the city for a company, and I hadn't been at the job for very long, and I got called into the office 3 times by the director, and basically she said, "You're not giving 100%, you know, you need to be giving more." And basically said if I didn't improve that they'd let me go. I'd only been at the job for a little while. I had replaced a secretary who was really, really good at the job. And obviously this made me feel really bad. And my dad said to me, he said, do you think you know who it is that might be complaining about you? And I had been getting some sort of negative vibes off one of the consultants. They were an urban research company, and all the consultants worked around the back, and I was up the front of the office doing like reception, secretarial work. I'd come from a job where I was used to just having work put in my tray, and I'd just do what I was given. So I said to Dad, I said, yeah, I think I do know who might be complaining about me. And he said, maybe the first thing you need to find out is whether it's personal. And to confront that person, you know, in a respectful manner. And I was very young, and that was quite daunting. But I think I did give it some preparation and some thought. And obviously I went in to sort of, I suppose the bit about affirming relationship was that it gave me, by confronting this person, it gave me the opportunity to, I suppose, affirm the relationship from a professional perspective, and that was to say, look, you know, I want to do a good job. They're telling me I'm not giving 100%, you know, and asking her, is it personal? You know, I get the feeling that you're not connecting with me. And she straight away said, no, it's not personal, and told me exactly what she wanted me to do, which was to be a bit more involved and go around the back and ask if I could help and be more relational in the job, which is something that I'd not done before. But she respected me for it, and I ended up staying in that job for 4 years before I left, because I fell pregnant with our first daughter. So. Yeah.
Sometimes we need to be informed, like, you know, and people are hedging and like, just tell me what to do.
But I think the sad
tell me
thing
what you
was
want,
that, you know, she didn't come to me.
Yes,
She went and complained about
Yes,
me,
repeatedly.
which makes it really hard.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think if we can have that courage to confront people, but doing it respectfully and letting them know, you know, that we want to resolve the conflict or resolve the problem,
Yeah.
usually you can.
And this really is effectively a pathway. It's a respectful pathway where you're seeking solutions. You're not seeking to win. You're not seeking to one up. You're actually, especially in understanding interests, you're seeking mutual win-win.
Yeah.
And that's a much better approach to life and peace than I need to go put somebody in their place.
I actually ended up
Yeah.
forming quite a good friendship with this lady, and was
great.
able to share the gospel with her a bit later on
Yeah.
down the track. So
That is great.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks for sharing, Helen. I'm going to wrap up with just this question. I gave you an hour's notice. Are there any specifics that you think would be helpful to try to deal with? Because there's a few things next week. It's going to be a bit more scattergunny kind of like tips in peacemaking and things, but scenarios or things we've sort of covered the surface, go deeper in, or something to consider about peacemaking that you'd like us to discuss and work through? Yep, Joanne.
With family members and
Okay.
extreme mental health issues with trying to resolve
Okay.
conflict.
Yep.
I know that's a toughie.
Yes. Oh my. Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's probably quite common. Narcissism with family members. Okay. Yep. And maybe spectrum kind of, yeah, spectrum folk.
I feel this
Yep.
kind of apply to families as well. Just in terms of, like, I really appreciate today's, like just even the story that you've shared. It's just such a great example to show us like how we can harbor bitterness. But I was just wondering, like, this principle, like I was just struggling. I was trying to go through a scenario like with understand interests. I found it like the scenario that I was trying to, it was something that happened in the past. And I
Yep.
found it, the difficulties was I asked questions and trying to figure out what was the interest,
Yep.
like what was actually causing the conflict, but the person refused to talk about it. Like
Yeah.
I understood there was a conflict, and obviously the other person knew the conflict was there as well, but I couldn't figure out on my own what exactly was. I could think there was quite a few things that was indicating there was a conflict, but I didn't know exactly. Like it was at a work situation. And I think it was also hard, like living in a multicultural setting. Like some people assume that you understood the context that they were talking about, but actually you don't. Like
Yeah.
in my context, I was working with someone who come from an Asian culture, and she seemed to be working on her Asian culture assumption of work, superior, inferior, complex, whatever that was. But I don't have that.
Yeah.
And she seemed to be operating on that, and I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to understand maybe that was the conflict. But I asked her exactly what she wanted and was there a problem, and she never said anything.
Yeah.
So, and I think like sometimes family members are like that. Families assume that you understood what the problem is, and you ask what the problem is, and then they go, "There's no problem." And then you're like, "Okay, then what do I do?" There appear to be a problem, but nobody is
yeah.
willing to talk about exactly what that problem
No,
is,
that-
or
that-
what is
that's
the
good, 'cause I think-
the interest.
I think there's probably a lot of people going, oh, don't I know it? Haven't I experienced that? And especially with family, because family, we know everybody's dirty laundry, and there's more deeper hurt because relationships, like, you're my wife, you should know me better than ever, you should know this, right? Where if Matt did the same thing, like, we'd probably have a much easier conversation about something, because he's not 32 years invested. You ought to understand me and know me. What's wrong with you? That's hurtful, right? And so we just assume all this, everybody, and we assume people are just like us. So we might talk about the inverse golden rule too. Let me write that out. Okay, no, this is good. And ways to draw people out where sometimes, flat out questions like just tell me what the issue is. It doesn't work all the time. We actually need to have a different round of questions to get people. And so let's do that. That's good. Excellent. Okay. I think technically it's 12:30, so I don't want to hold anybody long. If you need to go, we won't think it's rude. We'll take a last question, and then. So I was going to say something. What was it? Sorry, before, when you were talking to Helen earlier, I was typing out, okay, we'll do this, but then I was laughing because there was something, your coworker. Oh, yeah, cross-cultural stuff. So we leave Tarragindi, don't even know the neighbors. They're mostly white, upper-class people. They just pull into their garage, and it's like, come over for a meal, it's like, maybe one day, kind of thing. We moved to Rochdale South. And I don't know if this is cultural or not, but like two different non-European cultures on each side, different. Both of them, hey, like my name's so-and-so, what'd you pay for your house? Everything, building, landscape, da-da-da. I'm just like, I'm Dave, nice to meet you, Both of them, right? It's just like, whoa, this is so inappropriate, right? Like, now, it's not to them, it's not to their culture, because and they're different parts of, broadly speaking, Greater Asia, but different parts. It's like, oh, and so the whole cultural thing, we can really not get cultural distance. And it's like, if I just sort of chuckled like, oh, this is hilarious, like, when it's say, oh, well, what's your credit card number? Anyway. But yeah, so like, I think even maybe, how to navigate is something cultural, and how can we gain understanding would be good. Yeah. The other kind of interest. Yeah. Last.
Sorry, just quickly. Can we do like a bullying scenario or an aggression scenario? Because I'm sure a lot of us have either had aggression in our family or we've had bullying in our workplace. How to deal with that?
Yeah. Ooh, boy.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's
Maybe we could practice, like do scenarios, like have a really mean person and then a really timid person or something.
Yep. Okay. It might be good to try to, like, we'll probably have to have our own thing on that. If we just have a Sunday dedicated to how do you respond if you're feeling, outside of Chris's legal stuff, which is getting so complicated. But yeah, maybe we could demo a bit of how to respond and not respond kind of thing. That's a huge and growing topic. Because I've got to be honest, as a Christian, just being in society now, I am offended regularly and I feel bullied often, but nobody cares about offense to Christians and threat, and it's only you and your self-esteem and anybody saying that anything should get in the way of what feeling or action you want to do. And it's not a two-way street. So like I think we will increasingly be and feel battered and bullied as we're now becoming the minority and what Paul dealt with it, we're the dregs of society, right? That was the Christians in Rome. So, good stuff. So let's just have a go with one thing, and I hope next month somebody will have a brief story or two without sordid details, but just, even if it's only one of the letters and why one of those was particularly helpful, and how it looked or whatever, without giving names and details away. So, Lord, thank you for our meeting. I thank you for the fellowship we have, that we can laugh at things, and we can also have pointed reminders about, hey, we should go into meetings not with an air of superiority, not prejudging, but to be neighborly, to be collegial with our colleagues, to be familial with church family and home family. Lord, keep imprinted in our mind an image of you and the gospel, so that when we pray like Corey, we trust you to provide the love and forgiveness that we cannot muster from ourselves. And we pray that we will meditate on what we can and should be thankful for and dwell on those things, so that we can do good to those even who don't want our good, and to bless those who curse, and to pray for those who mistreat. Help us to love you and be like you this month as we pursue peace. In Christ's name, amen.